Hello, I'm Alexander Carrier. Welcome to the program. Today marks the 100th anniversary of Ukraine's diplomatic service, created on December 22, 1917. Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko and Prime Minister Volodymyr Groysman attended a special ceremony to commemorate the century of Ukrainian diplomacy. To learn more about the service, we are joined by Hanna Shelest, Editor-in-Chief of Ukraine Analytica. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
So my first question will be like linking the past and today's situation in Ukraine. Ukraine always has been and is defined by the historian Sergei Plokhy as the gates of Europe, always has been in between these two worlds. What are, so since medieval times until now, what are the similarities between these times and these turmoil times and today?
You know, it seems to me that Ukraine always lived in the times of the turnovers and changes from the very beginning of its history. And definitely when we speak about Ukrainian diplomacy, it's not just 100 years old, but we can remember it earlier ages when the state had great times in the medieval ages, as we said. The similarities are definitely in the case that we never saw ourselves as this buffer or a bridge or something in between. It is something how we were perceived or how our neighbors usually wanted to perceive us. But for us, it was more like a melting pot of different identities sometimes, but at the same time of the really huge territory. You can't imagine that such a big country as Ukraine will be completely identical from west to south, to the east and to the north. And definitely, if you return back to the 11th century, for example, or to the 16th century, you always can see it how we needed to react for outside of our borders. Doesn't matter where these borders were at that particular period of time.
So we're talking about the early ages of diplomacy and also recently, Ukraine. History shows that Ukrainian diplomacy also plays on compromises. But what are the means of Ukrainian diplomacy today?
There are a lot. And, you know, recently, Foreign Policy Council Ukrainian Prism asked our foreign partners, how do you perceive Ukrainian diplomacy as the animal? And one of the answers were hedgehog. I really enjoyed it because it seems to me that is what Ukrainian diplomacy now. It's something what in fairy tales is always soft, small, nobody cares seriously about it. But at the same time, hedgehog is eating meat, not apples. And it can be quite dangerous of the sharp ends of its skin. That is what Ukrainian diplomacy now. It seems to me that sometimes it is underestimated, both because how Ukraine is underestimated at world area, but also because everybody used to us as people who can compromise, that we are more in the probably waters of flows of other policies, can it be Russia or European Union or the United States, and just few who really understood that Ukrainian diplomacy can be independent or strive to be independent, and when it is necessary, like in the time of crisis, it can be very sharp and I would not say dangerous, but somebody who can protect itself. And it seems to me that what Ukraine is now doing, for example, with the gaining support of international partners about Russian sanctions, or with the cases in the International Court of Justice, or when we sign military technical agreements with such countries, really show that Ukrainian diplomacy can be different, but definitely, unfortunately, sometimes it is relaxed and only crisis what made us to do it.
So under the label of Ukraine USSR, the Republic of Ukraine was a founding member of the UN. So between 1944 and 1990, the delegation actively participated in its foundation. So how much did it help for its emancipation when USSR collapsed?
You know, the fact that Ukraine was able to be part of the United Nations, even that definitely most of the decisions were under the policy of the Soviet Union, but it played a lot in the possibility of Ukrainian diplomats to grow up, to establish the diplomatic service school, Kyiv Institute of International Relations in Ukraine, So we already had the academic background for 1991 when we needed to create our own full-fledged MFA. And also because for many of those diplomats who worked in Moscow, it was a possibility to return back. They were already identified themselves with Kyiv, with Ukraine, with the new MFA that they wanted to create. But also it was very important politically and psychologically, because if we remember, Ukraine was a member of the Security Council, even being USSR. And you understand how symbolic that is, how it was important for politically important Ukraine not apply for the United Nations, as, for example, Georgia needed to do, but just to change and said that we're here. We know what does it mean to be the United Nations member state, founding member state, one of those who already had a right to be in the Security Council. So we are ready to jump immediately in the work, but not to spend time in learning how things are going on in New York, Vienna, or Geneva.
You talked about the formation of the young diplomats at the time, but now my question is, as of today, what can young Ukrainian diplomats learn from a long history, of such a long history of diplomacy?
You know, first of all, we really need to learn about long history of diplomacy, because unfortunately to date, many faculties of the international relations, what we study, and I'm one of the alumnus of such faculty, that definitely it was more about history of the world. It was something about diplomatic practice, but only one small course that was speaking about history of diplomatic or better say, history of foreign policy of Ukraine. And sometimes we definitely don't know the great names that were in the Ukrainian history that created the perceptions about Ukraine at the world arena. Those ambassadors that were sent abroad and who created the name. And that is definitely that probably what should be taught to our students at the International Relations Department, so they feel that it is not something new for the Ukrainian state, that we have some background to be proud of and some probably lessons to be learned. Because if we remember and just try to search, for example, in the United States, so many diplomats published fantastic memoirs after their time in the Foreign Service. In Ukraine, you can find just few. And it seems to me that if more of such memories would be published, it can create better understanding both for students and for the public what really have been done, how we reached that moment that we are now. About some most interesting times, as I don't know, our Ukrainian-Romanian case in the International Court of Justice. It is full of stories, if you know people who were involved there. Or as in memories of Mr. Zlenka, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, fantastic stories about how mission to the UN were the same building with the Russian, for example, in the beginning of the 1990s. That's really something that allow you to feel what does mean to be a Ukrainian diplomat in the turbulent time.
And now we saw today with the Canadian Foreign Minister coming in Ukraine, the best ambassadors for Ukraine, sometimes the best ambassadors for Ukraine's interests, are often from the Ukrainian diaspora in other countries. Why is that so? How would you say so?
You know, luckily it is not in all countries, even that with Canada, definitely, Ukrainian diaspora played a huge role. And you can feel it both when you're in Canada, but also in Ukraine. And it has been like this from the very beginning of the Ukrainian independence. So Canadian support is definitely. In the United States, even, it is already less. Because even that you have a lot of Ukrainian diaspora there, but just few of them were really open lobbyists, if we can say like this, for the Ukrainian state. United Kingdom is one of those states where probably Ukrainians played a lot. But if you go to Africa or to Asia, definitely it is more work of our business and business contacts, or opposite way, of those students of these countries who studied in Ukraine, returned back to their countries and became the promoters of Ukraine, of its interests or its culture in their own countries. But sometimes even that our diaspora really play a great role in many countries, but don't overestimate it, because Ukrainian diaspora is not so huge as Chinese or some others.
Now, and that's going to be my last question, what are the biggest challenges to overcome for the Ukrainian diplomat service today?
There are a few, probably. I would not name one. And Russian aggression is definitely a very banal answer. And if, to be honest, for my opinion, it's not the biggest challenge that we have. The biggest challenge is to have professional, proactive Ukrainian diplomacy. We definitely need reforms, which have already started within the MFA, but we need more of them. We need finally to get our ambassadors to the country where they should be, but not have so many empty places in the world capitals. And we need to change perception of the education in the foreign policy service as well. So more professionalism, not be afraid to be proactive and open-minded.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this interview. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio, even though it was Skype. Thank you again. That was Hanna Shelest, editor-in-chief of Ukraine Analytica. This was Hanna Shelest, editor-in-chief of Ukraine Analytica. Thank you for watching the program. Stay tuned for the rest.